Hey, everybody. I just wanted to talk a little bit for a minute about your writing assignment number 2, the community risk assessment. I made some pretty extensive comments on a number of your papers. And I guess what I want to say is that I recognize that a couple of weeks or whatever it was that you had to do this is not sufficient time to do a community risk assessment, especially for those of you that live in larger communities. Or there's a lot of different combinations. Some of you may not have a community per se if you're not with a fire department. Some of you may have may not have access to all the information, and certainly in that short period of time. But and part of it for me in this course, it's going through that process. A community risk assessment takes a long time. And it's going to involve more than simply you or your department. It's going to involve other agencies within your jurisdiction, whether it's EMS or the hospital, public health, emergency management, law enforcement, to get a real picture of the true risk in your community. So when you think about, some of you mentioned motor vehicle crashes. That is going to be something where you might, well, not might, but would, have to involve the police department or the sheriff's office, whoever your law enforcement agency is, in order to get down at why these crashes are happening, where they're happening, who they're happening to. You know, we hear a lot about distracted driving. Is that what it is? Is it young people, or is it older people, or all the above? You know, so there's a lot of digging that has to be done to get to this. So this is what this is going to be kind of my synopsis. I took a lot of that into consideration when I posted your grades, though in your mind they may seem a little low. But demographics. When we talk about painting a picture, it has to do with, I know one of you said, you know, that a certain amount of your population falls between 20 and 60. The rest is above or below that. Well, you know, knowing how many children under 5 are in your community, how many people are over 65, what percentage of the population, is really important, because those are some of our high-risk target groups. If you have a problem with lift assist, say, in your community, which most people do if they do any kind of EMS or emergency medical response, is that happening to older adults? Where is it happening? Is it happening in their homes, or is it happening within a facility? So all of that kind of helps us paint a picture. What about the demographics as far as nationality? What sort of implications is that? It's more than just saying, okay, we have this percentage that is Hispanic and this percentage that is Asian. What does that mean exactly? I mean, interpret that. In our research course, we talk about that a lot, of looking at it, not just spouting numbers, but what does that say to you as a practitioner in safety, public safety in your community? So demographics, age of housing, that's important, because it may let you know, I mean, number one, you know, as they get older, it's the 10-year smoke alarm thing, and it may even be substandard housing now. I think somebody mentioned that it was a part of it was aging, but that made the housing the substandard. So we know that all of those things contribute to the risk of fire or other injury. So dig deep when you're looking at the people. Where do they live? In that area. I know you can't just say in my county. I'm from Hall County. That's where I came here from. I think most of you know that. And there was a very dramatic difference between the northern half of the county and the lower half of the county when it came to demographics. Most of the people in the north were farmers. And I say most, a lot of the people. And in the south, they were more business related. They were commuters to Atlanta. It was just a whole different demographic. And so it mattered when it came to what we were targeting for our risks. Speaking of risks, that's the other thing that I would ask you to look at again. Sometimes we get caught up on target hazards. And there's a definition for those, as we have all learned in our careers in the fire service, if you've been around a while. And those are those places where if something happened there, it's really bad. Some of you mentioned pipelines, hospitals, schools, all of those are target hazards. But you have to couple that with how many school fires have you had in your community? How many hospital fires have you had in your community? How many breaks in the pipeline or LP gas tank farms issues have you had? And so sometimes what we need to focus on in our risk reduction is the more mundane type of call, that everyday call, where when we look at perhaps the severity may be moderate, but the frequency is all the time. The numbers of people that are experiencing those things. So there's all this information that kind of goes around with that. So you have to look at your own response data. And most of us report to the National Fire Incident Reporting System. So there's some way that that information is captured. Sometimes it's figuring out that way, and it's also figure out who is the keeper of the information. Sometimes in larger departments especially, that's a little hard. When we went through there's material in there about the plotting of determining acceptable level of risk. Always a tough question. It does come down to several things. It comes down to politics, it comes down to economics, and it comes down to people, the human choices. I recently worked on, and actually the next course, the next community risk reduction class will be participating in a self-study course that is being piloted right now by the National Fire Academy. And I helped work on that course. And one of the acceptable level of risk is in a community, we came up with this example of in a community, people are concerned that about the number of cars speeding through the neighborhood. So they want to put up these speed bumps, we call them. There's another more complicated term, but we'll refer to them as speed bumps in the community. Well, there's people that don't want that because it's going to make their time to work, their travel time longer. And if they did that, that would mean that the park nearby that was due for upgrades would not get those upgrades because the money's going into the speed bumps. Okay, this is, it is not a true story, but it's an example of the choices that people make. Some people want the park, some people want the speed bumps. Another example, actually this is a true story. My cousin told me this story about they had been wanting to put up, where his house is, they wanted a four-way stop at the intersection because there were a lot of wrecks and people were being injured. And instead they chose to pave the road. And he said that didn't solve the problem of the wrecks. They were just wrecking on this nice new pavement now. So it comes to, it's all about choice. And those are not choices that we can make necessarily, but where we can help is we can present the argument of why we need the speed bumps and not the park. Or we can do the speed bumps and we'll get a grant for the park. We can't get a grant for the speed bumps, but we can get a grant to renovate the park, whatever. It's our job to kind of sell some of that. Make sure that when you are looking at the data, use the charts that are, but they're both in that publication by Vision 2020 on community risk assessment, and they're in the course content. I realize that you may not have been able to recreate that graph on your papers, but looking at the probability and frequency. Remember that frequency is how often it happens, and the probability or frequency helps us predict the probability that it's going to happen. And then the consequences, the impact and the severity. What is going to be the impact? and the economic impact, the political impact, all of those aspects of impact, and then severity. Will people die? And so how many people will die? So you look at each of those two things independently. There's the probability, which is frequency, and probability are this kind of, they're not the same thing, but they're on one axis, as I'm drawing in the air. And then your consequences are on another axis. I think frequency and probability got a number on those graphs. Consequences got a letter. And so then what you do is you plot in the third graph that you had with probability on one side, consequences on the other side. You plot the alphanumeric, and that's going to give you a guidance of, does this need attention now? Can this wait? How quickly can we get this done? Or how quickly can we intervene? So look at those things again if you were confused. Look at that 2020, the Vision 2020 publication, as well as what's on the course site with those three different matrix. And if you take one, then you take the other, and then you plot them together. I know it's math. Sorry. But that's just what it is. And that will help you to determine that acceptable level of risk instead of just saying, I think this is the way it should be. So remember that we have to look at what we respond to on a daily basis and what the potential is in the community. Here where I am now, of course, we've had a couple hurricanes in the 5 years I've been down here. So that's a possibility. We can't predict when they will happen, and we can't prevent them, but we can be prepared for them. We can mitigate those. That may not, and so that may not be a big deal for where you are. Maybe a snowstorm or an ice storm is a greater thing, or a residential house fire. I had one project from someone in DeKalb County, and for those of you that are familiar with the area, DeKalb County is right outside Atlanta, and they have apartment fires every day. And he was in an area where there was an apartment there where that happened all the time. And so I worked with him and to pick one apartment complex, or maybe two, where he wanted to focus. What are the demographics of that particular community? Community is, you can define it however you need to. But the whole point is to get all the information that you can about your community and the risks there, and try to prioritize. As we go further, we'll figure out that even we have 1, 2, and 3. We realize that we maybe can't do anything about one, whatever it might be. I'm trying to think of an example, and one's not coming. So we may have to pick our second choice, because we can, people refer to it as low-hanging fruit. We can fix that. We can fix that pretty quick. We can intervene there. And remember that, this is the other thing I was gonna say, I got off track, about your risk assessment, is that nowhere in the risk assessment are we saying how we're gonna fix stuff, fix the risks. We're not, that's not a part of it. We are just simply, at this point, identifying them. You have chosen one or three, maybe, or one that you want to target. And you're going to write a problem statement and a goal for that one risk. And it needs to be focused. That's what community risk reduction is all about. It's strategic and focused. And so one of your colleagues in class did a good job on their report. And I have asked for permission to share that with the group. If I get that permission, I will. I don't share papers unless I have that permission. So no, kind of keep this in mind when you look at your papers. If you've already looked at it and you look at this video, go back and look at your paper, and maybe it'll make better sense. But I think you can see that in order to do this correctly, you got to have data, or data, whatever you want to call it, and a garbage in, garbage out. And so this really comes down to some further training that's outside the scope of this, in that fire officers need to understand the importance of accurately reporting the information about the incident. That we know that if we click smoke scare versus a fire, we have fewer screens to fill in. Well, we got to understand that just because that fewer screens is actually less information, and if we really want to do something that makes a difference, we have to have the information. So I just wanted to talk a little bit. I in no way, shape, or form expected you to do a complete community risk assessment. But these are just some gaps that I saw and what you have provided. It's a hard concept, and I recognize that. So don't feel bad. But again, it's going through the process and making sure that you get all the information that you need so that you can demonstrate to others what the risk issues are in your community. You know, if you're the chief and the mayor says, or the county commission says, what's the #1 risk issue in our community? What can you answer that question? Some places can and some places can't. Your community risk assessment will help you do that. So just wanted to share that with you. Let me know if you have any questions, and carry on. Thanks.